Hello, and welcome to our Ask Me Anything session on nanotechnology. We are thrilled to have you join us today, and this session is a unique opportunity to ask our distinguished guest anything about his work, background, research, and innovations in the field of nanotechnology. But before we begin, there are a few important details. So, this, of course, is a live session, and we are very excited to see so many participants already. Many of you have already submitted your questions during the registration process, and we appreciate your interest and your support. If you haven't submitted your questions yet, you can still do so during the session, by simply entering your question into the box on the right hand side of your screen and clicking send. Please be sure to make sure your questions are relevant, and our team in the virtual backstage will be reviewing them to maintain their appropriateness. We'll address as many questions as possible before the session finishes, and whilst listening, be sure to check out the literature section on the platform where you can find your certificate of attendance. If you do encounter any technical issues, just click the chat icon that you'll see in the bottom right corner of your screen, and our team will provide you some assistance. So, once again, welcome to our Ask Me Anything session. And without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce our expert for this session, Dr. Thomas Webster, a world renowned biomedical engineer and entrepreneur with over 28 years of experience at the forefront of nanotechnology. So, hi, Tom. How are you doing?
Hi, good, Lucy. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you. I think one of the very first questions that I always ask our speakers is, could you give us a quick introduction to who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, the quick part might be hard, but absolutely. So, I pretty much have been a professor my whole entire life. So, I'm an engineer.
Mhm.
I have a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering, a PhD in biomedical engineering, worked at several universities as a professor, still teach courses. Right now, I'm at Brown University teaching courses, but I'm also different, I think, than your typical professor. So I'm very entrepreneurial. And I formed, I don't know, over a dozen companies throughout my time. I made a sort of a career shift at the start of COVID to spend more time with those startup companies to try to get the wonderful research that my students have performed throughout the years into humans. So
Mhm.
my research is not only nanotechnology, but more of the health, the medicine, the bio part of nanotechnology. So I've been, tickled pink, so to speak, on the progress my startup companies have made through the years. I'm not CEO of any of my startup companies. I'm chief scientific officer for
Mhm.
the most part, and really try to, these days, trying to advance our products through the regulatory agencies, to work with industry to scale up manufacturing, whether they're implants or whether they're sensors
Mhm.
or nanoparticles that can be useful for drug delivery, trying to get these into humans and really help human health. That's my last phase of my career is where I started, but more on the industry side of trying to promote human health with nanotechnology.
Mhm.
Is that okay as an intro?
Absolutely perfect. It
Awesome.
is so interesting, which is actually quite a nice segue into another question that was just requested a lot. And a lot of people are very interested in how you became interested in studying nanotechnology.
Yes, well, so wonderful question. So I got my PhD from 1995 to 2000.
Mhm.
And really, this was a region, a time period when not many people knew about nanotechnology. In fact, people who knew about nanotechnology thought it was hype. They thought it was going to be fake science,
Mm.
not real science. And I remember sitting with my PhD thesis advisor trying to come up with a project that I could complete for my PhD thesis and looking at bone. I've always been interested in bone. And
Mhm.
maybe it's because I was 6 years old and I was hit by a car and I broke my femur,
Mhm.
right? The largest bone in your body. And it healed on its own. I'm completely healthy. But I've always wondered, why did that bone heal on its own? But if I was 16
Hmm.
26, 36, I'm approaching 56, and that's not the same. You might need
Hmm.
an implant that heals your bone. So I remember looking at bone and seeing that bone was actually made of nanoparticles. Tissues in our
Hmm.
body are composed of nanomaterials. But yet, when you looked around medicine, nobody was really exploring nanomaterials, especially for medical devices. So, my simple hypothesis for a PhD was if you created an orthopedic implant
Hmm.
out of nanomaterials, could you increase bone growth compared to what was being used at the time? And, 28 years later, the answer is yes, but
Yeah,
we're asking so many more questions about this really unique category of material and how it can be used in medicine.
that's incredible. I love your stories, Tom. Although it wasn't
Thank
a,
you.
it wasn't the nicest kind of for you, but it's lovely to hear you talk on these sort of subjects. Um,
Thank you.
Someone else has kind of actually, just a reminder, of course, this is a live session, so do make sure to pop all of your questions into the chat box on the right hand side of your screen. And some of them have already been coming in. So someone here is saying, if you could work on any project, regardless of funding or feasibility, what would it be?
Yeah, so I love bone, as
Hmm.
I mentioned.
Yeah.
Throughout my career, we actually spun out a company called NanoV,
Okay.
which is making spinal implants to have a nano texture that matches the nano texture in natural bone. They are making implants. We are implanting these into humans. I'm very happy to announce that I think about 20,000 of these spinal implants have been inserted into humans. None
Wow.
of them have failed. So there's been no cases of infection, no cases of implant loosening. Another problem with orthopedic implants is scar tissue.
Hmm.
There's been no cases of chronic inflammation leading to implant failure. And keep in mind, the average failure rate for a spinal implant is about 5 to 10%. So the fact that over the past 5 years or so, we've been getting 0% failure is,
Huge.
I'm done, right? I'm ready to go to the Caribbean
Yeah.
and finish my career, right? So I'm
Go and
so
sit on the
happy.
beach.
And credit goes to the first initial graduate students who were
Hmm.
on this project, the company, the CEO for getting through the FDA for regulatory approval, and of course, all the surgeons who have been using our material and seeing these wonderful benefits.
Hmm.
So I've kind of moved beyond bone because I feel like yes, we've done a great thing here for patient health with bone,
Hmm.
but I think a couple of things that are on the horizon that I am spending a lot of time on now and hopefully will continue. Implantable sensors, I
Yes.
believe, is the future, right?
Hmm.
We're all aware of these things, right?
Hmm.
This counts my steps when I'm running. It tells me what my heart rate
Heart
is.
rate, sleeping.
Yep. Am I getting quality sleep, right? The
Hmm.
rings that you can wear to determine if you're getting quality sleep. So we've done a great thing with wearable sensors.
Hmm.
But think for a moment the data, the information you can get from a sensor that's in your body.
Hmm.
And on top of that, can we use that sensor to control events? So if we measure a spike in a protein that indicates you have a clogged artery and you're about to have a heart attack, can we have that same sensor remove that clogged artery,
Hmm.
return natural heart function? So there are so many things we can do with implantable sensors. And I firmly believe nanotechnology is at the heart of implantable sensors.
Hmm.
Small materials, minimally disturb the body, have a high surface area that can measure these small changes in pH, oxygen, proteins, all the things that can tell you if you have a health problem.
Hmm.
So I'm convinced in the next 10 years, and it's already starting to happen, we will see a huge input of implantable sensors in the body. And again, implantable sensors to me is not just sensing you have a problem,
Hmm.
but changing that problem, reversing those issues to ensure a healthy life, right? Think about it. If you were about to have a cell mutate into a cancer cell and your immune system did not kill that cancer cell, can't we develop materials in your body that could kill that mutated cancer cell before you get a tumor,
That would
before
be
you have a health
incredible.
problem?
Hmm.
Right. That I think is that's my vision of the future of medicine and nanotechnology. And I know there's a lot of my colleagues who are working very hard at developing implantable sensors.
Hmm.
And
Incredible.
I should say implantable nano sensors,
Yes.
because I think the nanotechnology part is so important when we think about sensors for today.
Hmm. Absolutely. And kind of on that similar theme, there's been a bit of chat in the comment section. A lot of people are talking about nanotechnology edibles. Um, how much do you know about them? A lot of the questions are there any hazards that people should be aware of for that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think nano edibles, but from a sensor point of view, right?
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of work in terms of developing pharmaceutical agents
Hmm.
that can be nanoparticle form, can survive the acidity of your stomach, release in your intestines. That is wonderful. A lot of research going on. Putting that aside and just thinking about sensors, in the research field, I think nano edibles are a fascinating area of research, right?
Hmm.
Again, think about it. If you had a material you could eat and it could somehow gather data as it goes down your esophagus into your stomach, it can measure, whether you have ulcers in your stomach, do you have
Hmm.
tissue abrasions in your esophagus, even looking at the sphincter that's
Yeah.
between your stomach and your esophagus. I hate to say, but I do get heartburn.
Hmm.
Perhaps I need to lay off the spicy foods a little bit, but is the sphincter in my stomach to esophagus working okay?
Hmm.
Or is it weak? Is it not closing when it should close, opening when it should open? And think also if those sensors, those nano edible sensors, go into your intestine and
Yes.
start looking at things that might be wrong in your intestinal wall. I think there's a huge opportunity, especially if these sensors quickly get excreted by the body, or if there's a way they degrade
Hmm.
as you're consuming them. So, again, to me, nano edibles go hand in hand with sensors and give us the ability to gather more information, more sensitive
Hmm.
information from the body to help human health. I think also one area, and cut me off with an additional question if I'm speaking too
No,
much about these
absolutely.
issues, but I think another future part of medicine, and I think this is why nanosensors will be a critical part of our future,
Hmm.
is nano edibles too. They can assess our personal health.
Hmm.
So my immune system is slightly different from yours,
Yeah.
right? Obviously, I'm older. We're of different sexes. I have a different life history than you do. So I'm going to respond to a different health treatment than you will,
Yeah.
right? Think about orthopedics for a
Hmm.
second. If I get a titanium hip implant, my body is going to react different than you.
Hmm.
But yet, we will probably get the same
Same thing.
titanium based implant if we both have problems.
Yep.
And maybe I have bone cancer and I need a titanium implant,
Hmm.
and you just break your bone from getting in a car accident, God
Hmm.
forbid. But the same implant for completely different people, completely different reasons, that makes no sense to me.
Hmm.
So we can use sensors before a medical intervention to understand how will you respond to a particular treatment versus me, and then tailor that treatment to that patient. That
Hmm.
is personalized medicine that we have yet really to embrace in our healthcare system, but we can get there with nano edibles, with nano sensors.
And also, if you think about nano edibles, you also, the tests that you would previously have had to have faced, a lot of people have a lot of reservations because they're putting, big tubes down you or up you or whichever
That's right.
way. But something like nanoedibles would hopefully, fingers crossed, you
Simple.
would see alleviate that kind of stress surrounding those
Absolutely.
procedures.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we're also seeing, I think we're beginning to see this in medicine a lot, where
Mhm,
our medicine is becoming easier to use,
mhm,
right? And we're seeing that people are taking advantage of these more easy to use medicines, right? Think of this is wonderful to think about, but think about a colonoscopy.
yeah,
Right? A colonoscopy, there are many people who will say, never. I don't
mhm,
care what's wrong with me. I'm not getting a colonoscopy. There are obviously people who will have any kind of health intervention to
mhm,
help improve their health. I think we as engineers, we as scientists can reduce that barrier for people to get healthcare and get diagnosis. And this is why now you can send a stool sample in the mail to
mhm,
have a preliminary check if you have a risk of colon cancer. Granted, the follow up, if that's positive, and a colonoscopy is definitely recommended if you have a history
mhm.
of colon cancer, but it has helped
Yeah,
thousands of patients to know that you have an easy kit that you can do at home rather than getting a colonoscopy. So that's just one example. But in all of medicine, we need to think about this. We need to
mhm,
think about reducing the barrier for people to get healthcare, right? And
absolutely.
and and think of what we just have been going through with COVID,
Yes, mhm.
right? And think about if we had kits for people to determine if they had COVID at the start of
The
COVID,
very start, yeah,
the decrease of impact
mhm.
COVID would have had
It
on our
would have
healthcare
been,
system.
yeah,
So,
completely different.
yep, to have these sensors, to have these ability to have an easy to use diagnostic kit at home, which
Mhm.
sensors should do. We're developing a sensor that you grow off of an implant and it can communicate to your cell phone and it can do
Incredible.
that at home.
Mm,
Or if you're traveling on vacation, you can
yeah,
have a constant assessment of how well your implant is performing rather than being required to go into a hospital to
yeah,
get an x-ray or a
mhm.
bone scan or something. They're not highly invasive, but they're obtrusive.
Yeah,
And
absolutely, you're
they
not
they
tied to that location.
right, they impact, our ability to move around freely. And we will get there. We will have these more readily available, easy to use sensors, materials, assays that can be used to lower that bar so
Mhm.
that everybody can get access to healthcare.
That would be fantastic, and I think also going on from this, I've been watching the chat box, and it is going crazy. A lot of questions are in there about ethical considerations about nanotechnology.
Yeah.
Um, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so great questions, right? And it seems like as with every technology, we're chasing our tail
Mhm.
on toxicity of nanoparticles, possible health consequence of nanomaterials. And nanotechnology is no different, right? We
Mhm.
created these materials first, and now we're saying, especially nanomaterials that are not being used in medicine. So, nanomaterials that are being used in electronics, they're being used in building constructs, non medical applications. We made these materials, and as an afterthought, we're saying, well, gee, are they toxic? How about
Mhm.
the health of the workers who
Yeah.
are making these nanomaterials? What gloves can protect your hands from a nanomaterial? What mask
Mhm.
can protect your lungs from a nanomaterial? So, my take on the ethical considerations, or, what often is brought up as toxicity of nanoparticles, is we're still learning,
Mhm.
right? We're still learning. And keep in mind, everything is toxic,
Yeah.
right? I could drink too much water and
Yeah,
die from too much
absolutely. Yeah.
water, right? So to
Mhm.
me, it's when you think about toxicity or the ethical considerations of using nanomaterials, you have to keep in mind the concentration
Mhm.
that you want to use. And we still need a lot more studies. We need a lot more funding to conduct
Yes.
studies on not only our health toxicity, but the environmental toxicity of nanoparticles. And
Mhm.
I think, too, as we begin to collect this information about toxicity of nanoparticles, we shouldn't give up on a nanoparticle. There's a lot in the literature
Mhm.
suggesting that carbon nanotubes are toxic. But
Okay.
when you dig a little deeper, sometimes those studies were conducted in a way they shouldn't have been, to be honest.
Mhm.
If many people early on tried to correlate carbon nanotubes with asbestos, and
Mhm.
as we know, asbestos was used as insulation,
Mhm.
and people wondered, are carbon nanotubes going to suffer the same cancer that asbestos caused in workers who installed asbestos?
Mhm.
But some of those studies were not conducted the way that you would get cancer from asbestos, right? You got cancer from asbestos by breathing it in,
Yeah.
and the asbestos fibers got stuck in your lungs, and they caused mesothelioma, or lung cancer. Some of these studies in the literature were not animal studies where they were breathing in carbon nanotubes. They were injected with
Mhm.
carbon nanotubes, and some of them, their lungs weren't even injected. Other parts of their body were injected with, and these are animals, were injected with carbon nanotubes. And clearly, that's comparing apples and oranges. We have to have accurate studies
Mhm.
on the toxicity of nanomaterials. But if we find that they're highly toxic, we're not giving up on them. We're thinking of functionalizing them, changing their dimensions, putting different chemistries on them to make them less toxic. But we
Absolutely.
still take advantage of their attractive properties, just modify them so that they have a decreased toxicity.
Yeah.
So in short, the answer to that question is, I think there's a lot more research we need. We really need to focus more attention on not just health
Mhm.
toxicity, environmental toxicity of
Mhm.
nanoparticles, but
Mhm.
let's not give up on them if we're finding they're toxic, and let's modify them to be less toxic, but still have that attractive conductivity, attractive mechanical properties, attractive whatever properties that we got interested in the first place.
No, absolutely. We don't want to be ruling things out. So
Right.
I think some of the questions I'm seeing in this chat box are incredible at the moment. So I have a question here from someone wondering about the interaction of lasers and nanoparticles in nanotechnology. Could you
Yes,
elaborate on how nanoparticles are interacting with lasers and potential medical applications?
absolutely. Right. So in nanotechnology, we often think of making nanoparticles from the bottom up,
Hmm.
or nanomaterials doesn't could be a nanotube, or could be other kinds of geometries of a material,
Hmm.
or top down. Right. So traditionally, I would say, 25 years ago when we started in this field, really people were considering chemical precipitation as the way to make a nanoparticle, right? I'm in a lab right now. So I could
Yeah.
take chemical A, chemical B, mix them together, they precipitate into a nanoparticle. Wonderful, right? Easy, super well understood, the chemical reaction. We then use these to study for drug delivery, for tissue engineering, whatever the medical application is. Then we discovered that some of the chemicals we were using were toxic.
Hmm.
Some of the catalysts that we were using to drive that reaction were toxic, right? A great example is many people use cobalt as a catalyst to make carbon nanotubes. Well, cobalt is not something you really want in your body, right? It
Hmm.
has a high toxicity profile. So then people started looking at these other methods, and one of them was laser produced nanoparticles. So this is top down, not bottom up.
Hmm.
And taking a material, maybe it's a micron particle of a certain chemistry, and add a laser, and then you reduce the size down to nanometer. Still easy, very easy, very simple, easy to scale up. You well controlled. You
Hmm.
can make different geometries, different sizes. What is wonderful for me to see is the laser produced nanoparticles seem to involve less toxic materials. So you could claim that they're more environmentally friendly, but they're also demonstrating better biological properties. Many studies, if you're trying to kill bacteria, are showing you need less of these laser produced nanoparticles than the chemically precipitated nanoparticles. So there seems to be a really good research area there to figure out why, right? Is it because the laser is not using a catalyst? So therefore, these nanoparticles are better
Hmm.
at performing their job, like killing a bacteria or killing a cancer cell? Or is there some other fundamental reason why? Is crystallinity changed? Is chemistry slightly changed because of the high heat from that laser? But it's a wonderful to me because it shows a different way to make a nanoparticle that's working, that's
Hmm.
giving us these attractive properties. And even building off of that, another wonderful area of research is cell made nanoparticles.
Hmm.
And obviously, pharmaceutical industry is using cells to make pharmaceutical agents, right? With these bioreactors, et cetera. Well, you can do the same thing with nanoparticles. You can have a culture of cells, you add a metal salt, and they produce nanoparticles. And what's wonderful is you don't need a lot of times a toxic catalyst
Hmm.
to make cells make nanoparticles. And again, when you do cell work or you do animal studies on these cell made nanoparticles, they seem to be better at performing their function than those made through typical chemical precipitation, old fashioned. Sounds weird to say that in the same context of nanotechnology, but the first
In
way
the
we used
scheme of
to make
things, yeah.
nanoparticles. So, how wonderful it is that we have many different ways to make nanoparticles, and they're all showing a value in medicine. And
Hmm.
laser produced nanoparticles is certainly up there on my list as a key area, a great scale up industry based way to make efficient nanoparticles.
Lovely. That was a fantastic answer, Tom. Thank you so, so much.
Not
Um,
not not too long winded.
Absolutely not. No, not at
You
all.
you can tell I still have professor blood in me, right?
It runs strong. So, I've seen a lovely question here from someone called Robert who said, "What was your biggest 'this is incredible' moment working in
Mm.
nanotechnology?"
Wow, that is, I would have to say, as somebody in biomaterials,
Hmm.
you can do in vitro work and show in a petri dish that something works,
Hmm.
right? People do it all the time, and we publish papers, right? To translate that to an animal is a big jump, right? So we had a series of studies, again, to go back to orthopedics,
Hmm.
where we were implanting nanotextured implants, and we showed in vitro that they work. We understood a mechanism why they increase bone growth. And by the way, they can kill bacteria or decrease bacteria growth on an implant by using nanotextures. But when we got that first animal data confirmation, that was something, and this was in the early 2000s, that was something to me that said, are we on to something?
Hmm.
And then we had our first human data come back. Again, I mentioned that we're nanotexturing spinal implants. When we saw the first x rays come back and we heard from the first surgeons that this not only we knew was working in animals, but it's working in humans with no infection, increasing bone growth, returning mobility faster back to humans with spinal problems. That was another aha moment, and said, you know what? Those in vitro experiments were so important. They helped us identify what type of nanotexture to create, how to create it. They also helped us understand the mechanism why they work, but we
Hmm.
were able to translate that and see the same results in an animal and then see the same results in a human. And that, I think, was probably, it you have faith in your own research,
Hmm.
but until you see it in an animal or a human and somebody else has done it, I think you always question,
Hmm.
is it real? Is this a real result, or is this, just something that's happening in my petri dish, in
Yeah.
my lab, with my supplies? So that translation to animals and to humans, that I
Huge.
think was one of my biggest, and still is, you know, and I'm
Absolutely.
and I have wood here. I'm going to knock on wood. You know, I feel like there's some luck still involved in all of this, but let's continue to hope that we see no implant failures with
Mhm.
these nanotextured spinal implants and other implants that we're making.
Fantastic. I love this. I love this Ask Me Anything so much. The questions we are getting in are incredible. Your answers are fantastic.
Thank you.
Moving on to kind of more of a general sort of topic here, is a lot of people have been asking, what does a day in your life look like? What does your team look like? Who do you kind of work with on a regular basis?
Yeah, so it has changed throughout my career, right? I
Hmm.
think again, I was a very typical professor from 2000 until 2021.
Hmm.
I did very typical professor things, right? I taught courses, I ran an academic lab, I wrote grants, we published papers, we went to conferences. And also, as I mentioned, I met with entrepreneurs, I
Hmm.
met with investors to support, our startup companies. So today, what the typical day for me looks like, since I am now concentrating more on my companies
Hmm.
than my academic affairs, today I am pitching my ideas. Everybody's heard of the elevator pitch.
Hmm.
So I probably give an elevator pitch once every other day to because
You've nailed it.
right. Unfortunately, in this time, you need money to
Hmm.
do studies,
Yeah.
especially in biomaterials. You have to get through the FDA or whatever regulatory agency is in your part of the world,
Hmm.
and you have to scale up and get industry to make what you want. So I spend a great deal of time pitching ideas to investors. I have several companies that need a CEO. So I'm interviewing people for CEO positions. I run a lab.
Hmm.
So of course, all these companies, there's about 12 of them that we have an incubator space that's not affiliated with a university, that
Hmm.
we do a lot of this work and we advance our research and come to decisions about, what is our business plan? What should we raise for Series A or Series B funding?
Hmm.
Even I had a meeting yesterday that should we continue this company,
Okay.
or is the idea not good enough, or
Hmm.
is the idea ahead of its time? It's just not the right time for
Yeah.
this particular nanotechnology in medicine. So I do a lot of business things.
Hmm.
I write a lot of patents. Patents are very important if you
Yeah.
want to start a company. One of the first questions an investor will ask you, do you have
Have you
patent
got one?
protection?
Yeah.
Right?
Hmm.
So I'm not a lawyer, but if there's any lawyers who are listening, please don't be offended. But I can write a patent. It's
Hmm.
not hard to write a patent. Of course, when you write a patent, eventually you might have to meet with a patent examiner
Hmm.
to get your patent issued. So I spend a lot of time talking to patent examiners
Yeah.
to try to get our patents issued. So it's a lot of you know business things. And I would say what is odd in my career, because I'm always thinking about how I got here, is in college I started out as a business major.
Okay.
And then I switched into engineering.
Hmm.
So, in an odd way,
That's where it's
here
come from.
I'm going full circle, right?
Hmm.
I'm headed back to where I started, which was this interest in industry, in
Hmm.
business, right? And raising money and being an entrepreneur and all of the ups and the downs that come with that. It's ironic to me that even though I switched majors in college, I'm kind of back to my root interest in
Hmm.
in business. So I don't know if that was a clear answer, but my day is not typical. I could get a call in an hour from a
Hmm.
major investor who wants to meet with me in 5 minutes. I'm
Yeah,
there.
you never know. You're a busy
I'm
guy.
there.
Not enough hours
So,
in the day for everything you're doing, Tom.
well, and also I would say I think what has been key to my everything I've accomplished, as well
Hmm.
as my sanity, and as well as my joy,
Yeah.
waking up every day, being excited what I'm doing, is surrounding yourself with good people,
Yep.
right? The
Mhm.
students in my lab throughout the years, the people in my companies now, these are great people, right? And I
Mhm.
often give a word of advice to people that if you find yourself around people that are being negative, they're maybe they're jealous, maybe they don't think what you're doing is important, whatever that negativity is coming from, talk to them,
Mhm.
tell them you're feeling negativity, you don't think their attitude is correct for what you're doing at that moment. If
Mhm.
things don't change, get out of the situation.
Yeah.
Stop collaborating with them. And believe me, I've been at 3 universities, and there are people you do not want to collaborate with. And there are places that you probably don't want to be.
Mhm.
So leave, right? Life is too short to
Yeah.
deal with negativity, to
Mhm.
have people who, and believe me, we submit papers, we submit grants, we hear critical evaluation all the
Yeah.
time.
Mhm.
And obviously, I'm not going to tell a grant agency that I'm not going to collaborate with you, but I can tell other professors,
Yeah.
I can tell business people, I can tell other students, I'm sorry, it's not working, I'm gone.
Mhm. And
And,
yeah.
it takes courage to do that. But believe me, if you get out of a negative environment, you can really succeed in however you envision success.
Yeah. Fantastic. And I liked that little bit of advice at the end there as well. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Well,
So
we've all been around the positive people and the
yeah.
negative people. And I
No,
think,
absolutely.
unfortunately, some people think they have to stay around the negative people. You don't. Get out of the situation, get
Mhm.
around the positive people, and
Yeah.
not only do good things, but have fun while you're
Mhm.
doing it.
It's great advice for getting into nanotech.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I cannot believe that I'm saying this, but we are over halfway through the session.
Mhm.
We've still got some fantastic questions coming in. And obviously, this is a live session, so do make sure to drop your questions into the chat box on the right hand side of your screen and click send, and we'll be answering as many as possible in the remaining time that we have. So, there's been a lot of chat in the chat box about nanotechnologies, nano coatings, but more specifically, how they can be used in reconstructive biomedical neurotechnology. So it's a very niche
In the
sort of
brain.
topic that's being discussed. But just wanted your thoughts on this, how they're
Yes.
being used in that area.
Absolutely. So, and there's several answers for this, but
Hmm.
one thing we know about nanomaterials, and let's say you're coating a neural probe, right? So, neural probes are used to generate electricity in parts of the
Hmm.
brain where conductivity is no longer occurring, right? You
Hmm.
maybe have neurons that have died or brain injury, so you no longer have active brain tissue. So, a lot of people use neural probes to jumpstart, so to speak, the damaged part of a brain. The
Hmm.
problem with a lot of these neural probes, yes, they're electrically conductive, but they're made out of materials that induce scar tissue formation. Same thing happens in the rest of the body. There's just different cells involved in scar tissue formation in the brain. And a
Hmm.
lot of times we call this glial scar tissue formation. So the one thing that the field has learned, we've seen this too, but other people have supported this, is nano coatings on neural probes can decrease glial scar tissue formation. So if
Okay.
you create the right nano texture, you can create a surface energy
Hmm.
that changes the absorption of proteins, that reduces glial scar tissue formation. And that is so important because if think about it, right? If you have a neural probe in your brain, and instead of interacting with a neuron,
Hmm.
it interacts with scar tissue, non conductive, unconductive scar tissue, it blocks the conductivity from the electrode
Hmm.
to jumpstart the brain. So reducing scar tissue formation is so important. And that's what nano coatings can do. And we've actually seen in our own work, in animal studies and in vitro studies, it doesn't matter what chemistry, right? Remember the definition of nanotechnology. De- Nanotechnology is a size dependent property. It
Yeah.
should be true for any chemistry that you
Mhm.
work on, as long as you create the right particle size, as long as you create the right nanotube size, the right surface texture, it should work independent of chemistry. And
Mhm.
that's what people are reporting is these nano coatings on neural probes can reduce scar tissue formation,
Mhm.
make those neural probes last longer, functional in the brain to enable return of motor function, to enable jump starting of the brain to be conductive. So that's just one area. Another area I'm reminded of is bacteria in
Yes.
the
Mhm.
brain. So, meningitis, right? If you get
Absolutely.
bacteria in your brain, you have the blood brain barrier,
Mhm.
obviously, that keeps a lot of drug therapies from going in. Nanoparticles, if created correctly, can penetrate the blood brain barrier. You
Mhm.
can put functional groups to target bacteria. Same thing with cancer, with a neuroblastoma, right? Cancer that you might have in the brain. You can functionalize those nanoparticles to attach to bacteria, attach to cancer cells, and now kill those cells, where you can't do that with micron particles because they simply don't go through the blood brain barrier.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I think there's tremendous opportunity with using nanotechnology, whether it's nano coatings on neural probes, nanoparticles to fight various neurological diseases. But I think we just hit the tip of the iceberg on the impact nanotechnology can have in the brain.
Massively. I know that you've spoken about kind of the opportunities there. And a lot of the questions that we were having in that were pre-submitted were around kind of your thoughts on current limitations of nanotechnology.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question. I think one of the biggest limitations is what we don't know.
Yes.
So, that we touched upon the toxicity issue, the
Yeah.
manufacturing
Mhm.
issues, those are big unknowns and those are big limitations. But the other part, and I don't want to criticize regulatory agencies because they've been friends to me, and I
They've been very good.
understand, right, and I understand the pressure regulatory agencies are under. Here in the
Mhm.
US, the FDA is understaffed, yet we
Mhm.
continue to ask as a culture, we continue to ask more and more from these regulatory agencies. But that's another big limitation, right? Is any nanomaterial you put in the body, there are additional questions, right?
Yeah.
Do those nanoparticles break off of the coating in that neural probe,
Mhm.
and where do they go, right? Do they escape back out of the blood brain barrier and go to your kidney, go to your liver? For the orthopedic implants that we developed that are in humans,
Mhm.
where does that nano wear debris go, and does it
Yeah.
cause toxicity in that organ? So that's a big limitation, is getting things through the regulatory agencies doing these studies to show that yes, they can be cleared much more
Mhm.
efficiently from the body. They can be, much more safe than some micron particles, which can stick around in these key filtration organs. So I think there's a couple of limitations, but I'll put on my business hat. I think another big limitation is there is so much wonderful research in
Yes.
nanomaterials that we have yet to translate into real products to help humans.
Mhm.
So there's a bottleneck in terms of innovation that's occurring, whether it's small startup companies, whether it's universities, whether it's government labs, huge innovation that needs to be translated by industry into real products. And once we do that, we get all of that wonderful research out into humans, we will start seeing hopefully the return of an increased life expectancy. I don't know if people realize this,
Yeah.
but globally, the life expectancy is going down.
Really?
And many, yes, and many people attribute that to COVID, and rightly so. that we've had a problem with COVID. But
Mhm.
even before COVID, in the United States, in Germany, in some highly industrialized nations, before COVID, life
Mhm.
expectancy was going down. So, we all need to take a serious look at our healthcare systems and ask the question, are we innovating enough? Are we
Mhm.
translating innovations enough into real commercial products to help human health? Because clearly we're not doing everything right,
Not doing it,
right?
yeah. Mhm.
Right. We have a lot more work to do that simple statistic that we're all accustomed to, increase life expectancy. We have to return to that. And I would say, as a last point to that question, it's not just about the average life expectancy, but it's
Okay.
about the quality of your life,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes.
You
I
don't want to be
enhancing
living
that. Mhm.
longer but not doing as
Not
much,
being able to
right?
do anything, yeah.
So we have more innovations that we need to translate into real commercial products to hopefully return this negative trend back to increasing life expectancy,
Mhm.
quantity and quality.
Incredible. Um, I just had no idea that life expectancy was declining, so that's you learn something new.
Yeah, the World Health Organization puts out these statistics. And
Mm,
of course, you have to look at each country and how that data is
yeah,
gathered. But what is surprising to me, and many of us in biomaterials and nanomedicine, we talked about this before COVID, that life expectancy was going down before
mm,
COVID in certain countries. I don't remember
yeah,
in England what was happening, or in other parts of the world, but I do remember the US it was going down, and in Germany it was going down. And that should be a wake. If COVID was not a wake-up call to us, that we
yeah.
need to change our healthcare system. We need to
Mhm,
get rid of old-fashioned hospitals. We
mhm.
need to stop our reliance
A
on
fresh injection.
prescription
Mhm,
drugs. We need novel new ideas.
yeah,
And they're there, but we have to translate them into industry. And I think that's why in my career I made this switch, right? To focus on startup companies, to focus on entrepreneurship. Because
mhm.
if I didn't translate all the wonderful research in my lab through the decades, what's the point,
Wasted.
right? Why
Mhm,
why do all of this wonderful research
yeah.
if you
If
can't
you can't
create real
translate it.
products,
Yeah,
right? Yep.
absolutely. I think that's very, very valid.
And hopefully not too controversial. I don't think
No.
it's too controversial.
So there has been a little bit of chat in the box, talking about forensic science and how nanotechnology might impact the field of forensic science, in your opinion.
Yes, absolutely, right? So diagnostic kits are
Mhm.
key in forensic science, right? Just like our ability to now sequence
Yes.
DNA and then
Mhm.
identify whose blood could be present in, I don't want to say, too many gruesome things, but
Crime
at a
scenes.
murder scene, right? Crime scene.
Mhm.
So nanoparticles are wonderful in
Mhm.
diagnostic kits. They helped us in COVID.
Yes.
So a lot of the kits that were sold contained nanoparticles to help detect if you had SARS-CoV-2,
Mhm.
if you had a virus. So same thing in forensics. I think, instead of waiting for a blood test to come back and tell us whose DNA that was, there's a lot of great research into nanoparticles
Mhm.
that can sequence DNA, right? It's kind of like a barcode, on the side of a product.
Yeah.
Here's Kim wipes. so so Kim wipes in
When
the
you've
lab.
got prepared.
So a barcode, right? So wonderful research. We're not doing any of this, but
Mhm.
fabulous scientists are doing research where you have a nanoparticle
Mhm.
correspond to a certain bar in this barcode. And then when all those nanoparticles get together, it says, oh, you have this DNA sequence in that blood type, right? Or in that blood. So, but it does it on the spot. So
Yes.
instead of requiring you to go back and do a cell culture or whatever you have to do to determine that DNA sequence, can we do it on the spot at that murder scene, right? And the same thing, by the way, is occurring for bacteria
Mhm.
infections, right? If you think you have an infection, you get a swab and then you culture that bacteria in a petri dish, and you usually have to wait a couple of days before someone tells you, well, that's E. coli,
Yep.
or that's MRSA, or
Mhm.
that's something else. So people are doing the barcode where you have nanoparticles that tell you right away that's E. coli
Mhm.
that is infecting you, or that's MRSA that's infecting you. And that time, think about it, right? That 2 days that it takes to get a result, at least for an infection, you could be passing
A
that
lot can
infection to other
happen.
people,
Mhm.
and it can infect you systemically. So
Yep.
the quicker we can determine what that health problem is, or at a crime scene, for example, for forensics, the quicker we can really help that situation.
Mhm. Completely agree. Tom, you're getting a lot of lovely comments in the chat box, you know. Um,
Well,
you
excellent.
are an absolute hive of information. A lot of people are just sort of saying, what are some of the current breakthroughs that you know about in this area of nanotech? I
Oh,
guess it's really giving you the floor to discuss whatever you would like to talk about because people are interested in this.
yeah, there are so many wonderful. I think there's a lot going on with implants. As I mentioned,
Mhm.
taking your orthopedic implants, your vascular stents, your pacemaker leads, right? The
Mhm.
electrical part that comes out of your pacemaker, a catheter, an endotracheal tube that
Mhm.
goes down your trachea. Nanotexturing those is a huge part of medical devices today. And
Mhm.
I would say, the reason why we got that through regulatory agencies so quickly into the products we have today is we were nanotexturing existing chemistries. So titanium,
Yep.
right? The polymer that's used for catheters,
Mhm.
we nanotextured that. So whenever you deal with the existing chemistries that are being implanted, you have decades that they're safe, and you're only changing roughness, you're only changing nanotexture, you can get quick regulatory approval. And I think the field needed that. I remember as a graduate student doing my thesis defense, my committee meetings, and going to conferences, people said nanotechnology is hype. It's
Mhm.
never going to do anything meaningful. It's just another way to get funding from the federal government to do research. So that drove me even more than you could
Yeah.
imagine, to show and to tell people what I was seeing in the lab. And
It's
I think
completely different. Mhm.
one of the things that was important for us in nanomedicine is to get a product out there that uses nanotechnology that's helping human health. And we
Mhm.
have that now, not only in my example, but the COVID vaccine
Yep.
uses a nanoparticle, it uses a
Mhm.
liposome, right? So there are so many examples today of where nanotechnology has actually helped. So if anybody tells you nano is hype, they're wrong. There,
Come back
there
and
are
watch this
real
AMA.
there are real examples of nanotechnology helping human health. So
Mhm.
all those things are great advancements. They'll continue to occur where we take medical devices, nanotexture them, make them better. I think also that the nanosensors that we talked about is a
Yes.
key area of health that's moving forward. I think another area that we have not talked about that I think is huge
Mhm.
is digital health and AI.
Yes,
So
actually. Mhm.
AI is starting to make a big difference in nanotechnology. And
Mhm.
of course, unfortunately, those of us who are spend at least some time in academics, AI has gotten a bad reputation, right? For chat GPT,
It can
right?
do, yes.
And I'm seeing papers that were written by chat GPT,
Really?
at college admissions essays that are written by chat
Okay.
GPT. So
Mm,
this is all the bad part, right? Put
mhm.
it to the side, concentrate on the positive,
Mhm.
right? What are the positive parts of AI? And in digital health, you probably know, but on your cell phone today, you can put in temperature sensors, you can
Mhm.
put in an ultrasound, you can connect an ultrasound to your
It's
phone.
crazy
I
when you
mean,
think of it.
this is just the beginning. And I think where AI is helping out is you can now at home do an ultrasound on yourself.
Mm,
You can do your temperature profile. And temperature is not only important for a fever,
mhm.
but after you get an implant, if you have inflammation, you have an increase of temperature. If you have
Mhm.
an infection, you have an increase of temperature. So we have so much data that we can now collect, not only with these extensions on cell phones, but these wearables
Mm-hmm.
that you can collect so much data. We need programs that interpret that data, AI, and we need to predict the future of your health based on that data, right? So we have a company that is basically collecting data from digital health, and
Okay.
it's interpreting that data to predict if your implant's going to get infected in
Oh.
1 month or two
Mm-hmm.
months, right? And it's all based on these temperature profiles, right, that you can get from your phone, and temperature spectrums that you can get from your phone. But it basically takes your health history.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a history of getting infection? Do you have diabetes and you're more likely to get an infection? Or are you perfectly healthy? You get 30 minutes of active exercise a day, so you're less likely to get an infection. It takes all that information with your current information, and through AI algorithms predicts what will happen for at least medical device infection. But of course, we think that's only the tip of the iceberg. We can also do this AI prediction for cancer. We can do this AI prediction for other diseases, where we assess what's happening today, take that with your patient data, and come up with a prediction on AI. I think that is a really
Incredible.
exciting future. And nanomaterials are critical,
Mm-hmm.
again, in this area, because nanomaterials have enabled us to have a portable ultrasound device, smaller, lighter, optimal properties. So shrinking down of these traditional medical instruments into small devices that can plug into an iPhone has enabled us through nanotechnology to push the boundaries of digital health and AI. So, I think what we have to what we have to face is, what do we do with the prediction that you might get a tumor in your lungs in
Mm-hmm.
5 years? What can we do to obviously offset that and keep
Mm-hmm.
that from happening? But again, I think in the next decade, AI will be prevalent in medicine to help predicting your health problems in the future.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I guess that actually ties back to an earlier question as well, of kind of the ethical considerations of how
Yeah,
AI will be kind of going into nanotechnology and everything, and how that would look like. So I guess that's all
absolutely.
to be
And
seen.
just and just to mention quickly, I totally agree with these ethical considerations, right? If I'm your employer and I
Yeah.
somehow get into your healthcare data and I see you're about to
Yeah.
have an infected implant and be out of work for 12 months, what do I do with that information,
Yeah.
right? So
Mhm.
data security is critical. Being able to have data secure, being able to, ensure that only the patient and their doctor, their
Mhm.
primary physician, is seeing this data, not everybody else. Critical issues that we have to address. And yet another example of where science is pushing the ethics, right? Which I think is great,
Yeah.
to have these questions, because that means we have technologies that can actually
That
give
can
us
do
these
it.
answers,
Mhm.
right? So it's
Absolutely.
wonderful questions for us to debate and consider.
Fantastic. Do you know what, Tom? This has been, I'm going to say it's been my favourite AMA. Thank you so very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And judging by the comments, everyone else has loved it as much as I have. So thank you so
You
much
bet.
for your time.
And just to make sure everybody knows, feel free to reach me by
Yes.
email.
Hmm.
I love communicating about science. So any other questions, any other things you want to discuss, reach out to me either by my Brown email or Gmail, etc. And let's keep the conversation going, because nano is not hype. It is really resulting in real health consequences, positive health consequences. Thank you, Lucy, so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tom. So, yes, please do remember that this AMA will now be made available on demand. So, feel free to share the link with your friends, family, or colleagues who might be interested in watching this session back. Once again, thank you all for your time and for your participation. And you will soon see a feedback survey appear on your screen. So, please do let us know your thoughts on that form soon. Thank you ever so much, and we'll see you again very soon.
Thank you.